everybody. So virtual instruction day, we're going to do our last set of notes here. I'm recording this in a video so you can do it whenever is convenient for you. I know you might have Wi-Fi issues. You might be outside trying to uncover a car or a porch or a sidewalk. You might have to take care of little brothers, sisters, cousins. So as long as you do this by 11:59 tonight and have your notebook filled in, you're fine. Okay? So we are starting on slide number 32, which looks like this. It's about cells. It was right after that one we did with the matching pictures. You're going to tell me in this Collins writing, what is a cell and what do you know about cells? So I'm going to pause for a minute or so and let you do that. If you need more time, go ahead and pause the video. So we're going to jump down to 33. So I have this open, I have this open. We're just going to kind of go through it together and fill in all the blanks. So, what's a cell? A cell is the smallest living thing or the smallest thing that is considered alive. So there are things that are smaller than cells, like atoms and molecules. And it's not that they're not important, because molecules are important. Like water. Water is a molecule. It's pretty important. But it's just not alive, because you have to have at least one cell to be alive. Here we have some red blood cells and white blood cells. This is what nerve cells look like. And here's some plant cells. Cell theory. Remember, theory is an explanation. So this is an explanation for cells and the origin of cells and how cells are formed, things like that. So first, all living things are made of cells. To be alive, you have to have at least one cell. 2, cells are the basic unit of structure in living things. So if you break us down into the smallest part that can still be considered a human, we would be cells. Geez, I cannot type today. There we go. And 3, new cells only come from pre-existing cells. So you have to have cells in order to make cells. They're not just going to poof into existence. Your cells come from the cells you already had growing and dividing. So, 4 things that all cells have. So you could be a bacterium or a plant or a human or a cat or something else. All of your cells, every single cell, everything that's a cell on Earth has these 4 things. And the first of those things is the cell membrane, which if you look at a picture of a cell, usually it's the outside border, which doesn't look very exciting, but in real life there's a lot of stuff going on in there. There's a whole unit about this when you get to Bio-B. Its job is to control what can come in the cell and what can't come in the cell, and what can go out and what can't go out. The cytoplasm is like the liquidy insides of the cell. It's technically everything inside of the cell membrane except for the nucleus. So this is where you find all your molecules dissolved, where you find all of your other organelles. If you don't know what an organelle is, wait till we get to the next slide. We'll talk all about them. It's basically like the squishy, jelly-filled donut insides of the cell. Ribosomes. We'll talk more about ribosomes in a minute. Because technically ribosomes are just bunches of molecules, but they have a super important job in that they create proteins. And proteins will do all the things for our cells. So ribosomes are pretty important because proteins are super important. Jeez, I can't spell. Instructions from... Okay. You'll see more about that process when you get to BioB, how we make proteins from DNA. It's actually super easy. It's like the easiest unit in all of biology. And DNA is what controls and directs all the activities of a living thing. So everything about you, everything that you are or ever were or ever will be is in your DNA. Ooh, and I'm going to add a little bit on there. So, there we go. So now we have two different kinds of cells. A prokaryotic cell means it does not have a nucleus or organelles inside of it. It's basically a cell membrane with a bunch of molecules inside. These are the bacteria. And you can remember this because pro rhymes with no. So prokaryotes have no nucleus or organelles. Includes bacteria. Everybody else that's not bacteria have eukaryotic cells, and that means they do have a nucleus and organelles, and eu rhymes with do. So eukaryotic cells do have a nucleus and organelles. And this is going to include animal cells, plant cells, fungi cells, protozoan cells, everybody who is not a bacterium. I'm going to do that way. Make this capitalized back here. So remember, no and do. If you've never heard of protozoa before, they're little single-celled things that are kind of a little bit like animals and plants and everybody else, but they're not really, so they're in their own group. Like amoeba are protozoans. All right, so prokaryotic cells, that's pretty much all we're going to say about them for Bio A. But we're going to get a little bit more into eukaryotic cells with some names of some of these organelles. So on this table here, you only have to fill in their function, or what do they do. I already told you where they're found over here. So a nucleus, its whole job is to hold the DNA. That's all that it does. It has its own fancy membrane around the outside that we call the nuclear envelope. And there's a darker spot inside called the nucleolus, which is where ribosomes are made. So that'll be important when you learn about ribosomes in proteins later on. The mitochondria, we know about this one already, right? You already know this answer. Cellular respiration. We did that in this notebook, actually. If you just scroll back up here. There it is. Cellular respiration, mitochondria. Remember, too, that all of the eukaryotes have mitochondria, even plant cells. And plant cells also get to have chloroplasts, which do photosynthesis. Only in plants, though, and some bacteria can also do photosynthesis, but they don't have organelles anyway, so they wouldn't have these. The ERs. ER stands for endoplasmic reticulum, but nobody wants to write all those letters. Here it is written out here in this picture. You don't have to remember. Just remember ER, endoplasmic reticulum. So there are two of them. One is called rough and one is called smooth. The rough one has bumps on it, so you can see it looks bumpy or rough. The other one doesn't, so it doesn't look bumpy, it looks smooth. So the rough ER, those bumps are ribosomes, and we just said a minute ago that ribosomes make proteins. So the rough ER makes proteins too, but these proteins are going to get sent out of the cell, so it's the same process, it's just the end is different. The smooth ER makes other things that are not proteins. Like, it can make lipids, it can break down toxins, it does lots of things depending on which cell it's in. Whoa. All these extra letters in here. Okay. So let's say the rough ER or the smooth ER make a thing. Like maybe the rough ER makes some proteins and it needs to send those proteins out of the cell. Then it can't really send them out itself, but it can send it to some other organelle that can. And that other organelle is called the Golgi apparatus, named after the guy who found it. If you see Golgi bodies or Golgi body, Golgi anything, we're talking about the same thing. They just have slightly different names for some reason. The Golgi apparatus, its job is to take all the things that a cell wants to send out, package them up into little bubbles, and send them out. It's kind of like the mailroom. We think of like a UPS or FedEx or anything that would send you packages. It puts stuff into little packages and sends it out all over the cell or even out of the cell. So let's say that you make a protein here. This is the rough ER. It'll then get packaged into little bubbles and sent to the Golgi, which will package it up into other little bubbles and send it out. The Golgi looks almost the same as the ERs because they're a bunch of membranes all folded up. But one way you can tell the difference is the rough and smooth ER are always right next to the nucleus. This purple thing's the nucleus. Whereas the Golgi is sort of off on its own. Vesicles are those bubbles. They're kind of like little bags. They look like cell membranes on the outside, but there's like little bags that carry stuff around. So if you need to send a molecule to a different part of a cell or even out of the cell, that's what a vesicle would do. That's what those little bubbles are that would transport things around. Lysosomes are technically a type of vesicle, but inside of them is something else. Inside of them are enzymes that will break down food and old organelles. So if you take in some food particles but need to break them down into molecules, the lysosome will come after it. If you have a white blood cell that takes in a invading bacteria or virus and then that kills it, digests it, that is what the lysosomes will do. They're kind of like the janitors, the custodians of the cell. They go through and clean stuff up. Vacuoles are like vesicles but bigger. They hold things. So vesicles hold things and move them around. Vacuoles kind of just hold things. In plants, there's one giant vacuole right here that's called the central vacuole. It looks like a big swimming pool type thing. And that's where a plant cell would hold all of its water and other things dissolved in water. There's also some smaller ones in these single-celled organisms that will release extra water. They're called contractile vacuoles. You should remember that plants have one large vacuole. That's why I highlighted it there. And lastly, the cytoskeleton. Cyto means cell. You see cytoskeleton, cell skeleton. So it's like your skeleton, but it's made of protein fibers instead. Here's some specific names if you'd like to know. Well, that help shape and move the cell. If you're familiar with flagella, like what comes out the back of a sperm, that's part of the cytoskeleton. Familiar with cilia? That's part of the cytoskeleton. There's lots of things the cytoskeleton does. So now we are on slide number 34, and you should have everything filled in except for these last couple here. So basically, this 36, 37, 38 we'll do next week at the beginning of the week. But you should have literally everything else filled in. I'm going to say this in the video form, so those of you who watched it all the way through, you might be able to get some bonus points here. Are you ready? We don't really need this review at the end that's on slide 42 and 43, because we're just going to use it for our final. We're going to just do our final exam instead of having a separate test. But if you do these two slides, you can get bonus points for them. So when I go to check your notebook, if slide 42 and 43 are filled in, you get some free bonus points. So maybe I'll take some time and fill them in now. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything else, please do send me a message. Otherwise, I hope that we'll be back in school on Monday and Tuesday. I'm so tired of snow. I'm sure you are too. See you then.